This is Genealogy Basics. I am rtetrick, and I am a genealogy assistant in the Kokomo-Howard County Public Library in the Genealogy and Local History Department. When you registered for this course, there was a packet you were to download and print, and I'll be referring to those pages later on. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? We all ponder these basic questions. Finding identity is a fundamental quest for all of us, from the Stone Age to the Atomic Age. Creating a family tree more than 25 years ago was quite an adventure. We often think of a family tree similar to a real tree, with a trunk and roots and spreading branches. Note that in this example, there are no women. Business Week article reported that the federal government only releases census information every 10 years, from 1790 to 1940, after a period of 72 years. The 1950 census results will not be released until 2022. Ancestry.com has all of these records online with a full index for each person in the United States. The 1850 census was the first to list not only the head of the household, but all members living in that dwelling. That does not mean that the woman listed under the husband's name was the mother of all of the listed children who follow. Some may have been born into a former wife, or some may be her children from a former marriage. Some may be nieces, nephews, neighbors who were present when the census was taken, or hired maids and laborers. Not until 1880 was there a designation regarding how the household members were related to the first person in that family. Don't assume that you have figured out the whole family from one census record. Genealogy is the study of your ancestors and descendants. Family history is a more intense research. The context in which these people lived, how they were related, school, military involvement, religious affiliation, occupation, political association, community involvement, relationships with neighbors, death, funeral, undertaker, death certificate, place of burial, tombstone, and much more can be learned from such a research as this. You are a unique individual, and every time you work back a generation, the number doubles. In 20 generations, you will theoretically find 1,048,576 ancestors. Will you find them all? It's unlikely, but you should be able to find most of your great-great-grandparents if your families have been in the United States for a long enough time period. If you are a first-generation American, it will be more difficult, but not impossible. Why look for your family? There might be an ulterior motive to find a rich uncle who left you $1 million. In most cases, it may just be innate curiosity. The old adage, who am I? And that is exactly where to start. Start with yourself. You will need a roadmap, and your ancestor or pedigree chart and the family group sheet or record are your basic tools. Talk to, or gently pester, the oldest members of your family, since they know the most about what happened before you were born. Record them telling family stories about anything that they can remember. There is a list of questions to ask in the packet. Once you have exhausted everything they can remember, it's time to document what you have been told. Some of what you were told may not line up with what relatives tell you. This may be because they really do not know the answers to your questions, or they are hiding some family secrets. Try asking different relatives the same questions independently and see if the answers match. Humans sometimes forget or don't recall all the details of an event. Searching census records will begin to place your questions in a manageable timeline, so you do not mix up all the men named Jim and all the women named Elizabeth. I would not suggest planting yourself atop a stepladder in a library, but you need to begin to develop a history for your family. Where did they live? Who were their neighbors? What church, if any, did they attend? Did brother and sister marry sister and brother? Were the parents related to each other 2 or 3 generations back? This is a short list of the kinds of information you will need to find about each individual. You will probably not find all of these about each person, but there will be certain individuals who will stand out in your research, who led very fascinating lives, whether famous ones or infamous ones. You can see there's birth records, marriage records, divorce, death records, school records, employment, religious, military, land and property, citizenship papers, family history documents, health, civil and legal activity, and census records. There are some rules of etiquette and behavior that you may already practice. Don't be impatient with librarians and public officials who are in charge of documents that you need to see. These pointers may seem self-evident, but they will help you in your research. Do your homework before you go in to look at vital records. If you do, they will help you with your research. Your homework will help in what you're looking for. You may spin your wheels getting started. A trip to the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana will overwhelm you if you are not prepared before you go. This is the largest public genealogy collection in the United States. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City in Utah is larger, but it is not a public library. Entrance is limited, and you do not have access to all the resources like you do in Fort Wayne. Records are located where the events happened, generally on a county level. Become familiar with a good atlas so you know that Marion, Indiana is not in Marion County, Indiana. Remember that counties and states were carved out of larger, earlier regions, so you need to know the time period when your ancestors lived in a particular place. Document as you go. Follow the same format in taking notes. List all sources you find, even if they contradict each other. Some history may be sensitive and should not probably be put out for everyone to read it. Record it in your notes for that person, but do not reveal it to cause embarrassment to someone. Sometimes wedding dates have been changed to avoid the early birth of the first child. This is not the fault of the child, so be discreet. If pieces are missing, make note of it and keep looking. Strive to obtain primary sources for each event. Sometimes this is impossible, so record all that you can find and try to make an estimate until you find the evidence later. People often find a person in a census with a certain age. If the actual birthday occurred later that year, the census record may be incorrect. Look for a certificate of birth or a baptismal record or a Bible record. A death certificate may or may not have the correct date of birth on it. A tombstone may have been created or erected years after the death of the person, and records are incorrectly dated. If documents are lengthy, record the location of the document rather than restating the whole item and making a mistake in the copying. Welcome the input and constructive review of others who may have additional proofs of events. Keep your research in the third person rather than starting by saying I or me. Always review your work and keep refining it. Did Honest Abe really write this on the internet? Think of context and do not accept everything you find as gospel. Sometimes people squeeze data into a mold that they have already created, even if it doesn't fit. Could a son be only 2 years younger than his father? Could a woman in her 60s give birth to 3 children? Now let's look at some of these materials that were in your packet. we'll go through them one at a time. There's an ancestry chart, sometimes called a pedigree chart or a family tree chart, a family group sheet or a family group record, a research log, a resource checklist, which is quite lengthy, and a timeline. Always use full names if possible. You may find a middle initial and later find the middle name, so erase and correct it. Use a pencil. All dates and places begin with the smallest and end with the largest. So 10 February 1898 or 7 May 2006. Do not use 2/10 or 5/7 plus or /06. Is it February or October? May or July? All reputable sources follow this format. Kokomo, Center Township, Howard County, Indiana, or abbreviations like TWP, CO for county, IN for Indiana. Marion is not in Marion County. Now, Ancestor Chart. In the top left corner, if you look at the ones that are in your packet, you'll see it says compiler. Top right corner says chart number 1. And then over on the left-hand side, about halfway down, it says number 1, beginning person. This is you. Don't start with somebody farther back in your history. Start with yourself, remember. Don't assume anything. Remember that full names, vital information from the smallest to the largest. At the top of the chart, in the middle, is a person, number 1. Put 1 in each blank since you are the first person on that first chart. Father of number 1 is number 2, which is right above the number 1. Mother of number 1 is below it at number 3. From this point on, the paternal or father side is the top half, and the maternal or mother side is the bottom half of the chart. Parents of number 1 are number 4 and 5. Parents of number 3 are 6 and 7, etc. as you go across the chart from left to right. At the bottom is a short form for the spouse of number 1. So if you want to start another chart for your wife or your husband, this is that person that will be number 1 on that chart. On the right edge are numbers for great-great-grandparents. You'll see 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, etc. Clear down. These numbers will appear on the following ancestor charts. So if number 16 is your great-great-grandfather on your dad's side, if you want to continue that line, that person will be the same as number 1 on chart number 2. Number 17, your great-great-grandmother, will be number 1 on her own chart, number 3. Number 18 will be number 1 on chart 4, etc. as you go back. Don't skip any of the numbers. Family group sheet or family record sheet. In the top right corner, it says chart number 1. Fill out all the information you know. If you do not know it, you will have to begin asking relatives or find records of birth, baptism, or christening, marriage, death, burial with dates, residences, occupations, church affiliation, military record, service, other spouses, father and mother, and maiden name. And that's on this second chart, which looks like this. Do the same for the wife. For children, fill out in full names, dates, and places of birth, marriage, death, and burial, names of spouses, and on the right edge, additional information, such as died in infancy, married twice, or whatever you find. These are clues for further research. The compiler information goes on the top lines, goes on the information lines at the bottom where it says compiler and address and city, state, and zip code, and then over to the right is date. This is how you keep track of everything so you won't get all your files confused. On the back, and I'm not showing it on here, but it is on the back of the one you have in your packet, are additional children and also sources. Where did you find the information for each person? You interviewed mom, you found an obituary, a tombstone, a census record, a marriage record, an online source, and persons who submitted the information, etc. You got to keep track of all your sources. The third one is the research log. Fill in as much as you can. This tells you when and where you found resources, why you are searching, and document numbers. A photocopy of the source is found in your packet to keep track and help you avoid searching for the same information twice, especially as you're in the beginning, so you don't find that I've already done that before. And there's a resource checklist. Now the one on the screen is a lot shorter than the one that's in your packet, so it's much more involved. Fill in as much as you can, federal census records, and they're all listed. Now this form up here on the screen does not include the 1940 census, which has been released. Also, you've got library, online, microfilm roll, all these kinds of things you need to keep track. Don't just say 1790 census. Each box, or if you're using Ancestry.com, it will tell you the series and the box number and the roll and the page and all this. Record all of that information. State census for some states, 1807 was when Indiana was formed. Kansas and other states, as they were prepared for statehood, or are on a special census. Probate records, church records, correspondence. Keep a copy of every letter you send or every email or text you send. Books and printed sources. In the right column, husband and wife and all miscellaneous records, interviews, family traditions, etc. This is a blank timeline with listing for places, of dates, and when for a particular ancestor. If you have a gap, leave a line or two to fill in later. It covers from birth to burial, but you should start with names of parents and where they were living. Now, other handouts in the packet include a checklist of genealogical resources, where should I look for information, and things like this. So do look through all those, and when you go to a library, always ask questions and get direction. This is a sample timeline for one of Amy Russell's husband's relatives. Not all of the dates and activities and sources are listed. The timeline in the packet is from the life of Lucy French Tetrick, who lived from 1768 to 1852, one of my own ancestors, and it's much more in detail than this is here. This is a sample family Bible record. This is from the David Foster Bible, David Foster was the founder of Kokomo. It was written, notice, in one hand, so probably done long after the birth events. If they were put in there as the event happened, you may notice that the handwriting will change slightly, but this is all very similar. So it was done maybe years and years afterwards. This is a list of the deaths from a Bible. You see that you've got at least 3 or 4 different handwritings. Some of them are in ink, some are in ballpoint. But they probably were put in there at the time of the event, so they may be more reliable than some of the other records you find. This is an application for a marriage license. Indiana began using these in 1882. Some states, like Kentucky, did not begin recording marriage applications until 1911. So if you're looking for a marriage record before 1882 in Indiana, you won't find it. Note all of the questions asked. Some applicants were truthful, others were not. And it asks quite a bit of information. Note that a prior marriage might also be recorded. Here it says, has such prior marriage or marriage been dissolved? And the person said yes. If so, how and when? It says divorce, and it gives the date of the marriage, and it also gives you the date of the divorce. Is the female contracting party afflicted with epilepsy, tuberculosis, venereal, or any other contagious or transmittable diseases? It says no. Some of these kinds of questions are not listed on more recent marriage applications, but they were on old ones. This is a death certificate. It may give you hints about a person's life you cannot locate anywhere else. They were only as good as the memory of the distraught informant. And the informant's name is listed down there near the bottom on the left-hand side. It says Samuel S. Taylor is the one who gave the information. And since it says Susan J. Taylor at the top, more than likely this is a relative. they were, there's information here from the attending physician, where it's only as good as the secretary's handwriting. Now this one is typed, so it's fairly illegible. Some of them you look at are really hard to read. It may or may not be trustworthy because Samuel S. Taylor may not have remembered everything about Susan J. Taylor, especially if he was her son and she was born a long time before him. So it says that her father was Wilbur Kelly and her mother was Elsie Cox. This is probably correct, but you need to check that. Try to find another one that says that she's buried in Vincent Cemetery, which is near the town of Summitville in Madison County. And it tells you the date when she was buried, and it tells you who the funeral home was. So if that funeral home is still in existence, you might want to check those records too. Now, sometimes editors or family genealogists want to sugarcoat the life of a particular person. An amateur genealogical researcher discovered that his great-great-uncle, Remus Starr, a fellow lacking in character, was hanged for horse stealing and train robbery in Montana in 1889. The only known photograph of Remus shows him standing on the gallows. On the back of the picture is this inscription: Remus Starr, horse thief, sent to Montana Territorial Prison in 1885, escaped 1887, robbed the Montana Flyer 6 times, caught by Pinkerton detectives, convicted and hanged 1889. This information is probably correct. However, in a family history subsequently written by the researcher, Remus's picture is cropped so that all you see is his headshot. The accompanying biographical sketch is as follows. Remus Starr was a famous cowboy in the Montana Territory. His business empire grew to include acquisitions of valuable equestrian assets, he was a horse thief, and intimate dealings with the Montana Railroad. He robbed it. Beginning in 1885, he devoted several years of his life to service at a government facility. He was in prison, finally taking leave to resume, he escaped, his dealings with the railroad. He robbed them 6 more times. In 1887, he was a key player in a vital investigation run by the renowned Pinkerton Detective Agency. They found him. In 1889, Remus passed away during an important civic function held in his honor when the platform upon which he was standing collapsed. Okay, take that for what it says. Tombstones. They sometimes give you some information that you think is a little funny, but notice this one has an expired marker with it. And it gives it the dates when the person was born and when they died, which I thought was kind of funny. This one says, I did it my way. And under the husband, it says, I did it her way too. Sometimes these things are kind of funny. So look for those little things that may be of interest and humor. Now, Murphy's Law for genealogy. Murphy's Law says, your grandmother's maiden name that you have searched for since day one was on an old letter in a box in the attic the whole time, and you didn't look at it. Murphy's Law of genealogy, you never asked your grandfather about his family when he was alive because you were not interested in genealogy then. That happens so often. People come into the library and they say, I should have paid attention when grandma or grandpa was talking when I was 10 or 12 years old and I didn't do it. Now it's too late. These are some common online databases. They are all available here in the Kokomo-Howard County Public Library in the Genealogy Department. Ancestry Library Edition, which is accessible to anyone at any of our library locations, and it's also available through the month of July from your home. If you have a library card and a password, you can get into this information for a limited time because of the coronavirus. Fold 3 provides convenient access to U.S. military records, including stories, photos, and personal documents of the men and women who served. Heritage Quest, accessible through the Kokomo-Howard County Public Library website with a library card and a password. The Howard County Memory Project. You can look at it here in our local history department, or you can do it from home. Newspaper archive, Kokomo and Howard County newspapers dating back to 1860. Not all the papers have we found, but there are lots of them. Findergrave.com, free access to tombstones and cemeteries. There's over 141 million records there. If you go to it at findergrave.com, you should be able to get in free. You can also go to it from our website. There's also another source, billiongraves.com, which is a little more difficult to use. FamilySearch.org. This is the Family Search, the largest genealogical organization in the world. It's associated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, if you go to this site, it will ask you to register, but it's not keeping your name. They just want to know where people are who are using their resources, so it's safe. There's also Cindy's List, which has been in existence since the mid-1990s, and it is a wonderful resource. There's also Pinterest and Facebook. Now remember, genealogy without sources is mythology. The family stories are just stories unless you can back them up with resources that confirm them or debunk them. I hope you have found this interesting and informative. Do come into the library to visit with me or with Amy Russell or whoever happens to be at the desk, and we'll be glad to help you with this. Thank you very much for listening.